All right, members of the jury, have you elected a foreperson? Would you give your juror number, please?
54.
54. And has the jury reached a verdict as to each count of the information?
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
One verdict and one verdict only.
Yes.
Would you hand all of the paperwork to the bailiff, please?
This is the ones that you didn't know.
Everything?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. May I see that too, please, Mrs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chairman? Thank you. The defendant will rise, face the jury, and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male. We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled? No. Okay. Okay, folks, your job is done, and we started just about 3 weeks ago. And I told you it could last 2 weeks and 2 days. This is 2 weeks. This is 3 weeks. You were a wonderful jury to work with. You were punctual. You were attentive. And the forgotten six over here who had a very difficult job of keeping from discussing the case during the time that they were sequestered as well. All of you, I couldn't have asked for a better jury to work with. And it has truly been my pleasure. I think, without commenting on your the verdicts themselves, just in terms of your the attentiveness and the cooperation that you gave to us, justifies the confidence that the founders of our country placed in you. So I dismiss you at this time. You're never under any obligation to discuss any aspect of this case with anyone. You're welcome to do so as little or as much as you want. The media have requested, a number of media sources have requested the ability to talk to you, and they have been allowed to present presentations to you that you'll get in writing, and it's entirely up to you whether you want to contact them. They are not to contact you. If anyone does contact you, and just tell them you're not interested in discussing it, if that's the case. And if anyone persists in doing so, report that to us and it will be addressed, I assure you. At the beginning of the trial, there was some concern about information and your safety, and I assure you that we will take every measure to ensure that that is your concerns are addressed and respected. I'm going to talk to you for just a minute, not about anything to do with the case, but just about that sole issue. And you, as I say, you're welcome to discuss the case as little or as much as you want. Any questions, anybody? Thank you so much. And you're after 4 years, you're eligible for service again. It would be my pleasure to work with you. Thank you.
Judge, you have to all go back upstairs.
Yeah, Please. Or in the they can attend the library. It's not going to be more than a minute, or maybe it will be.
Well.
Yeah, take them upstairs. That's fine.
The word said.
That's fine.
Not guilty. Kyle Rittenhouse has been found not guilty on all counts. This was not a complicated verdict. It was not, we don't need to parse all the layers of it. It actually ended up being simple, despite the ups and downs, this incredibly dramatic trial, the jury deliberating for days and days, finding out that the prosecution appears to have hid evidence from the defense. The prosecution had high-quality footage of the incident that night, and they kept that footage from the defense, which only had very low-quality footage. There was the question of, will there be a mistrial? There was no mistrial. The evidence all favored Rittenhouse. None of the evidence favored the prosecution. Even the prosecution's witnesses seemed to play into the defense's hands. I think everybody who was watching the trial, as well as all of you were, we were covering the trial a lot on our shows. A lot of us were watching it directly. We thought this is an open and shut case. Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty. And yet the jury kept deliberating. And the jury was getting threats. And politicians were weighing in. And the President of the United States was weighing in, Joe Biden. And an MSNBC journalist was trailing the jury bus, harassing the jurors. And NBC didn't even really deny that. They issued a non-denial denial. There were threats outside the courtroom. If Kenosha don't get it, burn it down. Direct quote. How did we end up in this trial in the first place? Because leftists burned down Kenosha the first time. And Kyle Rittenhouse showed up to a community where he works, to a community where his father lives, and he showed up and he was attacked. And he was threatened, and people threatened him with death, and very easily could have killed him, and he fired back in self-defense. And that's why everyone cares about this trial. They care about this trial in part because of the justice of it all. Is some teenage kid's life going to be destroyed because he defended himself? Is some teenage kid's life going to be destroyed not because of the evidence and not because of the law, but because of political correctness? Because jurors were afraid of the mob outside the courthouse, the leftist lynch mob that showed up for Rittenhouse. That was part of why. But I think more than that, the reason why people were so focused on this trial was because we were on trial, not us personally, but our rights, our right to self-defense. If you do not have the right to fire back at people who are aggressing on you, advancing on you, holding a gun, pointing weapons at you. People who told you earlier, I'm going to kill you if I see you later. If you don't have the right to defend yourself in that situation, you don't have the right to defend yourself. And the prosecutors made this claim. The prosecutors made the claim that if you arm yourself, if you exercise your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, then you somehow lose your Second Amendment right. Then you somehow lose the right to self-defense. Do we have that clip?
And one of the things to keep in mind is that when the defendant provokes the incident, he loses the right to self-defense. You cannot claim self-defense against a danger you create. That's critical right here. The defendant decided to pull the trigger on his AR-15 4 times. That was his decision. And he is responsible for every bullet that comes out of that gun.
Now, of course, the framing here from the prosecution is preposterous. Kyle Rittenhouse did not create the dangerous situation in Kenosha. Kyle Rittenhouse was attempting to help the dangerous situation. The leftists created the dangerous situation. He didn't even provoke the people who were attacking him. Right? That's why they were the attackers, and he was defending. He did not fire a single round at a single person who was not actively attacking him. But the broader philosophical and legal claim here from the prosecution is that if you have a gun, if you go into a dangerous area and you are carrying a gun, even if it's legal for you to carry that gun, then you don't have the right to self-defense. Basically, the argument the prosecution was making is, if a young woman goes out at night in a short skirt, she's asking for it. She's getting what's coming to her. And what was at stake in this trial is that could have become the law. That could have become the law of the land. If not on every single book, at least in practice. There was this question of the mistrial. Should there be a mistrial? There was so much prosecutorial misconduct here, so much journalistic misconduct here. How on earth are you supposed to get a fair verdict, a free and fair verdict, when the jurors are all being threatened and their lives could be ruined by journalists who are potentially going to dox them, by politicians up to and including the president putting pressure on them? And yet, a lot of us were not hoping for a mistrial. You wanted a mistrial in that you wanted to make sure that the kid did not go to prison for something that he didn't do. You wanted a mistrial as the insurance policy to make sure that this kid wasn't going to be sacrificed to the angry mob. But you didn't want a mistrial because you wanted the question to be resolved. In this case, did Kyle Rittenhouse commit murder? Did they do what they accused him of doing? No, he obviously didn't. But the broader question, do you have a right to self-defense? I don't want a mistrial on that question. I want to know a firm answer. Yes, I do. If there had been a mistrial, then you would have had people on the left saying either this is a miscarriage of justice, the judge knew they were going to lose the case, that the prosecution was going to win the case, and so the judge just helped get this awful, terrible Kyle Rittenhouse off the hook. You would have had leftists screaming. It would have emboldened the left. So you wanted it to be resolved. But for it to be resolved, that took a lot of courage from those jurors. Those jurors have families. Presumably those jurors, some of them have wives and husbands and kids, and they know what happens. They saw what got us into the trial in the first place. They know that these leftist mobs will burn the city down. They know that these dirtbag journalists will trail their bus and try to dox them and gin up an angry mob against them. And so it's easy for all of us to say, sitting here in a nice armchair watching the deliberations, oh, well, yes, it's so clear-cut. Of course, we would all say not guilty. Especially if we thought he was not guilty, we would say not guilty, right? But put yourself in their shoes. If you're in their shoes and you know all of the threats against you, all the threats that'll go on in the city, would you have the guts to do it? These jurors did have the guts to do it. And these prosecutors, goodness gracious, they should probably be disbarred. At the very least, they should face pretty serious penalties. In this case, don't let them get off the hook. The prosecutors admitted that they had evidence that the defense did not have. Do we have the clip? I don't know. I'm sure the producers will find the clip somewhere. They admitted that they had this sort of evidence. So initially, when it became clear that the prosecutors had the high-quality footage and the defendant had the low-quality footage, the prosecutors tried to blame the processors of the video. They said, oh, no, it's not our fault. The people we got the video from, it's their fault. They sent it to us and we all got the same file. And then the defense lawyer said, no, you don't. We had a different file name. So if you're going to blame it on, initially, I suppose they blamed it on the defense's computers and cell phones. They said, no, it was just a processing issue. No, it was a compression issue. You said, no, we had a different file. You had one file with one file name. We had a different file. So then the prosecution went in the other direction. They said, no, it's actually the guy who gave us the video. He sent it to us one way and to you another way. And we emailed it to us. And anyway, anybody's fault but ours. I don't buy it. That doesn't pass the smell test to me. I never want to ascribe to malice that which is equally explained by stupidity. And there was plenty of stupidity from the prosecution in this case. I mean, you remember there were these moments where on the stand you had one of the witnesses explaining that yes, in fact, Kyle Rittenhouse acted in self-defense, and you had one of the prosecutors put his head in his hands. He said it was absolutely awful. But take a listen to the explanation that the defense gives, and tell me if you think that this was just an honest mistake.
What happened when Detective Howard obtained the video, he airdropped it to my phone, which is a lossless type procedure, or at least it didn't change anything. At some point, I emailed it to myself, which did not change anything. It has the file name, the long file name. I did ask Detective Howard to email it to me as well. Then it had the IMG file name that Attorney Wisco received. So somehow in this Detective Howard transmitting it to everyone, if it was emailed, it was compressed. If he airdropped it, it was complete. And that was not known by anyone until a few days ago on Friday.
If you're watching the clip, you can just see the look on the judge's face. He's like saying, oh yeah, that's right. So you got it airdropped to you, and for some reason the other people didn't get it airdropped to them. Then you emailed it to yourself, but then for some reason when they got the email, it was no good. Not. And by the way, the story you're giving us now is a completely different story than you gave us the first time. Not holding water. Not quite. But the judge had a lot of pressure on him as well. Don't forget, the mob that was outside this courtroom, in some cases inside this courtroom because of the journalists who were pushing the left's narrative, they were trying to find any weak point they could. So they went after Kyle Rittenhouse, obviously. They made fun of him. They were trying to portray him in these ways that were divorced from reality. They were pressuring the jurors, but they were going after the judge as well. They actually accused the judge of being partisan because his cell phone rang in the chamber one day. So in the courtroom, the judge's cell phone went off, and they said, and he quickly silenced the cell phone. But the left said that given the ringtone, the judge could not possibly be impartial, could not possibly be fair. He's a far-right, white supremacist, Donald Trump stooge. Take a listen to the song that was being played on the cell phone.
If the court makes a finding that the actions that I had talked about were done in bad faith.
So it's actually unclear what the song was, but what the left identified it as was proud to be an American where at least I know I'm free. The Lee Greenwood's I'm proud to be an American where at least I know I'm free. This is a song that has been popular in America for 40 years now. Ronald Reagan used it in his campaigns. Donald Trump played it at some rallies. But consider the premise that they have here. They're saying, if you play I'm proud to be an American, if you go along with the sentiment I'm proud to be an American where at least I know I'm free and I won't forget the men who died to give that life for me, and I proudly stand up, if you believe that, you're a far-right nut job. What's the implication? That the left is not proud to be an American, that the left doesn't like the country very much, that they don't want to be free. They don't like the American conception of freedom. Now, thankfully, this judge was not going to be cowed by the mob, and he wasn't going to have to answer for why he said, I'm proud to be an American. That should not be a partisan expression in the United States, even though right now it is. So they couldn't get him on the ringtone. The other thing they got him on, though, they thought they almost had him dead to rights. They said this judge is a terrible racist. And never mind that this trial only involves white people. They tried to make it a racial thing, but only white people were involved. So that one didn't work too well. But they said the judge is a terrible, vicious racist because he made a joke about the lunch that they were being served. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do the joke, and then they're going to accuse me of racism. All right. Then I won't. They're still looking for the clip. There were so many hits from this performance. All right. Take a listen.
Let's hope for 1 o'clock. I don't know. Hope the Asian food isn't coming. Isn't on one of those boats in Long Beach Harbor.
So it was a joke about Chinese food or sushi or something. I don't even know specifically what Asian. He wouldn't even get specific on what Asian food it was, but they were having Asian food for lunch. And the judge said, let's hope that it's not on one of those boats in Long Beach Harbor. And the left said, he's a racist. How is he a racist? Now I think the left is not just emotional and disingenuous, but they're illiterate too. They don't know the meaning of words. Because the joke that the judge made, one, obviously was not racist, it was not about any group of people, but it wasn't even about the food. The joke was about the supply chain crisis. It wasn't, we get goods from Asia. They are in the harbor, mostly because of Pete Buttigieg and some of the failed policies of the Biden administration. They're stuck there now. That's why our grocery store shelves are empty. And so the judge joked and said, I hope that Asian food is not on a boat in the harbor. The left said, racist. Then the minute that didn't work, they said, well, he's politicizing this. Why is he politicizing it? He's making a joke about the supply chain problem. Well, okay, there you're admitting that it's the Democrats' fault that we have a supply chain problem, but it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work. And I mention all of this because weaker people would have caved to the pressure. It would be very, very easy for the judge to back off, to cave. It would be very, very, very easy for the jurors to give the angry mob what they wanted. But that didn't happen. Actually, the judge banned MSNBC from the courtroom, knowing that it would be called political, because MSNBC trailed the jurors and tried to intimidate them. And this is a reminder. This excellent verdict today is a reminder that not all is lost. Not all is lost. You actually can accomplish things. We actually can defend the United States if just a few good men stand up. It's not the arguments that the left was making here. And I say the left, I don't say just the prosecutors, I don't say just the state. I say the left because it really was a partisan issue. The left wanted to throw this kid in the can for his whole life. The left wanted to take away our Second Amendment right to defend ourselves. The left wanted to attack this judge and attack the jurors and harass them. And the right wanted to stand up for the rule of law and self-defense. And this teenage kid who got caught on the wrong end of the political correctness. We're now joined by someone who actually knows a thing or two about the law. That would be the grand poobah of this joint, Ben Shapiro. Ben, welcome
Hey,
to
what's going on,
your
Michael?
show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. So I will pick it up from here.
Please.
You're dismissed, sir. Alrighty, folks. So, you're staying. Okay, fine. So
I absolutely want to stay.
So
yes. But what happened from your legal vantage?
I've wanted you to go
Ben?
for years, but now that you're here, I guess we'll have to be here together. So let's talk about the verdict. So obviously not guilty on all charges. The thing that stunned me about the controversy over this is that the standard in American law is reasonable doubt, right? It wasn't even that the defendant in this case, Rittenhouse, had to prove that he did this in self-defense. He had to prove that there was reasonable doubt that he might have done this in self-defense. There is no human being with more than 2 neuronal firing synapses who did not know this was the case. Everybody knew that this was the case. If you had a prefrontal cortex and you watched this trial for more than 35 seconds, you knew the prosecution had nothing. You knew all of their witnesses were defense witnesses. You knew that all of the tape backed Rittenhouse's account. It is astonishing to me that there are still members of the media claiming that for some larger purpose, Rittenhouse had to go to jail, which, by the way, shows you where they are, because it was never about the case. And it's never about the case, right? It's never about the circumstances of the individual case. It's always about the broader narrative that must be pushed. And just like you got to break a few eggs to make a Stalinist omelet, you have to break a few defendants in order to create social justice, according to these jerks. And so the fact that the jury stood up, did the right thing here, is pretty impressive. It also, I think, underscores how much of a threat they were under, really, because to get them to not guilty, that means that that's either somebody had to be convinced to go not guilty, in which case the entire jury had to bring, logic to bear, or they knew not guilty from the outset, and they were waiting because they didn't want to be run up a flagpole for the grave misstep of somehow just saying the obvious right away. Whatever the case may be, it is perfectly obvious that this jury did the right thing, which means, of course, that the media and the court of public opinion will deem that the jury did the wrong thing. This is what you know what? At least Cal Rittenhouse ain't going to jail.
Right. No, this is what I want to know, though, on that period where they're just deliberating and say, what on earth could you be talking about? Were they waiting for a mistrial? Were they trying to kick the can to someone else? Or do you think that they were actually debating any of the facts of the case?
You know, who the hell knows? I have no idea what was going on behind closed doors. It's hard to imagine that there was a lot of debate going on behind closed doors about the facts of the case. Again, all they had to get to is, could a reasonable person have a serious doubt about whether Kyle Rittenhouse was guilty in this case? And the answer is, there is not a reasonable person on earth who wouldn't have at least a pretty serious doubt about whether he was guilty in this particular case. So again, if I had to guess, I would think that maybe the jury was like, we'll sit around for a couple of days and have some pizza and beer and think about, trying to kick the can down the road a little bit. Maybe a mistrial gets declared, or maybe at the very least, it looks like we spent time considering the evidence. But you never know. There could have been a couple of holdouts who were convinced to go along with the not guilty verdict. Whatever the outcome here, it's the media response that's going to be so telling, because you can see the long faces in the media like right now. If we tune over to MSNBC, I guarantee you that there are a bunch of media figures who are decrying the nature of America's criminal justice system. Well, if Kyle Rittenhouse had been black and his victims had been white, et cetera, or if Kyle Rittenhouse had been black and his victims had been black, and all the rest of it. The reality is the prosecution never had a case here. They never had a case. And by the way, if Kyle Rittenhouse had been a black guy and his victims had been black, you never would have heard the story. Right. It never would have been a story in the first place, because that sort of shooting takes place on a regular basis in Chicago. The reason this was a national story from the get-go is because the media wanted a narrative, and the narrative that they wanted from the get-go was evil white Trump supporters are out there shooting social justice protesters. And none of that was true. It just wasn't true from beginning to end. So good for the jury, good for the judge. And I hope that Rittenhouse, I hope he takes the media members who are declaring him murderer, the people at Facebook who are refusing to allow anyone to donate to his legal defense fund, I hope he takes these bastards to the cleaners. I hope he makes out like a bandit, because people need to pay for lying about people to the point where they end up in the middle of murder trials for which they clearly bear no culpability.
What about the prosecutors? Do you think, for instance, that they should have declared a mistrial? And what's going to happen to these prosecutors now?
I mean, I think that, frankly, I think the judge was probably waiting to see what the verdict was. So if this came down as a hung jury, I wouldn't have been surprised if the judge said, okay, mistrial with prejudice. Yeah. And he says, listen, we're going to have to retry this anyway, but you don't get to retry it. You blew it. Mistrial with prejudice. It wouldn't have surprised me if it had come down guilty and he had said mistrial. If it came down with acquittal, then that solves all the judge's problems. Right now, he doesn't have to do anything. Judges don't like being reversed on appeal. And so, I think what the judge is probably concerned about is guilty verdict. He doesn't declare a mistrial, and then immediately this thing is reversed on appeal because the prosecutors were just involved in too much shady behavior right here. And by the way, it's very interesting to watch who has shifted sides on how judges are supposed to be in the courtroom. So the left loves judges who are very pro-defendant, except when they don't like the defendant. That seems to be the common way of the world here. So this judge was one of their favorites for years because he was famously pro-defendant. The minute they don't like the guy in the dock, then all of a sudden this judge is a rabid right-wing nutcase who plays God Save the USA, God Bless the USA on his cell phone. So it's pretty astonishing. Michael, you know what? I want to take a moment and if you don't mind, play a couple of the clips from this trial, because I think it really is indicative of all this. So let's start. By the way, I just got in the chair, so I literally did not hear even the audio of the judge announcing the verdict. So let's start with that, because I'd actually like to hear it. Oh, we don't have that one yet? Okay, fine. So,
But we do have ZipRecruiter, I think. Get some new producers.
As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled? No. Okay.
Okay, so this is the first time I'm seeing that clip. So let me just point one thing out. Right, Rittenhouse there, he breaks down in tears. He looks exactly the same crying when he is declared not guilty as he did on the stand. Now remember, when he broke down on the stand, we got a bevy of blue checks saying it was fake, it was made up, that's not what he looks like when he's crying, it's all inauthentic. So was he faking this time too? Is he faking when he's declared not guilty? He's faking the tears for the camera there? Or are you guys just a bunch of vulturous bastards who hang around to pick on people you don't like simply because they don't have the same political prerequisites that you do and don't wish to uphold the lie that career criminals, child molesters running around the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin are heroes? If you reject that premise, then you have to be put up as some sort of evil villain. Rittenhouse was not guilty from the get-go. The tape showed it. I waited until the trial began because I thought maybe the prosecution has something I don't know about. That's what I do with criminal trials. I'm more concerned about being right than being first. But as soon as it became clear the prosecution had nothing, this was a clear-cut case. At that point, it was absolutely clear-cut. I thought it was clear-cut based on the original tape. But then you wait and you see, okay, fine, maybe they've got something I don't know about. Well, they didn't. They not only didn't have anything that we didn't know about, they were withholding evidence from the defense. They were literally not giving over the evidence they had to give over to the defense. It's absolutely unbelievable how bad the prosecution was in this case. And all of this, there's not a single iota of this case that didn't back Rittenhouse's case. That's the part that's so amazing. How is this even controversial? And Joy Reid will get on the air tonight and she will spontaneously combust. Joy Reid will get on the air and it'll be like something out of a Dickens novel. She will literally burst into flame and then she will melt like the Wicked Witch at the end of The Wizard of Oz, because she has created this bizarre notion in her head that Kyle Rittenhouse and Dylan Roof, the shooter at the black church in Charleston, are the same guy. And that is the vision that she has created in her head. Well, and she will not be dissuaded of that.
That everyone that she disagrees with is a white supremacist, including our friend Candace Owens, who I believe is joining us right now. Candace,
yes,
your reactions?
Without question. I have to say, obviously, I'm elated that Kyle Rittenhouse is getting his life back and that he's not going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But a part of this feels bittersweet. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. Like we're even having to go through this process, that we're even at the end of our seats wondering, is this guy going to get his life back? Or are people going to be so fearful of mob justice and of people coming after their families, they're just going to vote the way that the mainstream media and legacy media wants them to? It's sickening to me also because of his age. And I'm talking about when this actually took place. He was a 17-year-old kid. His life is never going to be the same, right? You don't come out of this and as the same person that you were going into this. This is a kid that was smeared as a domestic terrorist and a white supremacist, not just by media members, but by the now sitting president of the United States. Then he was campaigning for the president of the United States. This is problematic. So for me right now, I'm going to be completely honest. I want vengeance. Like I want to make sure that Kyle, until he's 92 years old, is suing every single person from LeBron James to Joe Biden to the people that are in Congress, Ayanna Pressley. This is not over for me. It doesn't feel like a win.
Well, there is some precedent here. I mean, Kyle could be Nick Sandmann Part 2, another guy who successfully took all of these guys to the cleaners, CNN, Washington Post. Ben, do you have any sense of whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse has a case here?
I think he clearly has a case when people were calling him a domestic terrorist. If somebody calls you a domestic terrorist based on the evidence that's right in front of you, what you have to do is you have to prove malice in defamation cases. In the Nick Sandmann case, these media outlets all had the full tape, and they continued to run those lies. Well, the same thing is true here. All the evidence was out, and people were still getting on the air calling him a domestic terrorist, suggesting that he was a mass shooter and all the rest of this stuff. So I think that there may be some defamation cases in the future right here. And I right now will pledge to give money to any fund he starts to fund any legal action on behalf of himself against these folks, because these people need to be sued into the ground. It is despicable to characterize a guy in this situation the way that they did, given the evidence that we knew at the time. And they weren't saying alleged. They weren't saying we think. They were saying this guy is a domestic terrorist and he needs to be railroaded, essentially. And then even after the evidence came out, that's the part that I can't get over it. I can't get over it. If you said that in the first 5 minutes of this case, that was bad. If you said this after all the evidence came out, and you continue to maintain, like Joy Reid does, that Kyle Rittenhouse is some sort of vicious, evil, racist, murdering scumbag who, if only it had black people out there, he would have shot more of them. If that is the way you broadcast, man, there ought to be some defamation consequences there.
Well, I don't think that the evidence ever really mattered. Perhaps Anna Kasparian. I think she was the one left-winger who sort of changed her views based on the evidence that came out. But there were always two trials going on. There was the trial in the court of law and the trial in the media, the court of public opinion, and they never changed their case. And as you said earlier, I mean, this was not about convicting a kid for what he did. This was about convicting someone to send a message. The basis might be a lie, but it gets to a greater truth. And so I'll tell you, I know Candace was a little down on the fact that we even have to be talking about this. It should have been it never should have been brought to trial in the first place. But it does make me feel a little bit better about the country that facts still matter. Evidence still matters. Justice, at least to some degree, still matters.
I mean, I agree with that, but I will say that Candace is right on this. The fact that one of the chief checks against this sort of behavior used to be prosecutorial discretion, that check is now gone, is devastating. Because prosecutors are answerable to the public. Juries are not answerable to the public because we don't elect them. But prosecutors very often are elected. And because prosecutors are very often elected, that means that they are going to cater to whatever they think the political whims of the day are. And because they're also elected, that means that there are interest groups who spend an awful lot of money electing prosecutors in various jurisdictions around the country. I'm an Orthodox Jew, so I'm allowed to say George Soros does this. He does do this. George Soros is behind groups that do fund the election of various DAs and prosecutors around the nation, specifically so that they don't enforce the law, or, as in this case, they bring absolutely specious cases with no evidence to back them because it backed the media narrative. And I'm going to go back to a story that broke today. Nellie Bowles, who used to report for the New York Times, and used to be a very left-wing reporter for the New York Times. Nellie Bowles penned a piece recently in which she said that she wrote a piece about Kenosha, Wisconsin, while Kenosha was going on. And she went to Kenosha and she interviewed all the people who had their shops burned down, because the media narrative was, it doesn't matter if the shops burn, everybody's got insurance and people have a right to be outraged. She went and talked to the shop owners. The parts of Kenosha that were burning were the poorest parts of Kenosha. And the people whose houses and whose shops were being burned, their car lots were being burned, those people didn't have insurance. So Nellie Bowles reported that back to the New York Times. And the New York Times postponed that story all the way from when this was happening last summer, all the way past the election. They ran it after the election to pretend that the election did not play a role in how the Kyle Rittenhouse case was portrayed by the media is to lie by omission. That's exactly what happened here. This was supposed to fit into a narrative. The narrative mattered more than the facts. And, thank God that the jury this time decided to do the right thing, but it never should have been up in the air in the first place. So I will say, I'm glad that the system worked well enough to acquit Kyle Rittenhouse, but if it did not work well enough to acquit Kyle Rittenhouse, the system is gone. So I'm very pessimistic in the same way that Candace is, which is we were this far from the system basically being evidence to be complete garbage. And instead, we have evidence that it's just kind of sometimes garbage.
Well, Candace, how are we supposed to rebuild our institutions? How are we supposed to have faith again in our system of law if this trial was this close?
And that's another thing. It's like the damages here, to me, should not just be monetary. Like, we need some recourse here. Let's also talk about the big tech colluding with this case. People, a year ago, if you wrote online that Kyle Rittenhouse was innocent, you could have had your accounts frozen, suspended. You have people that are not allowed to get onto Facebook because they said Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent. Facebook just gets to do that. They get to now be the judge and the jury and to say to people that they lose their platforms for telling what is now plainly obvious and now officially the truth. That's wrong to me. And this is why we have to talk about more than just monetary damages, but also pieces of legislation that are going to reform this. Do you guys have me, or am I frozen here?
I have you, Candace.
Oh, no, we got you.
I would never lose you.
We completely lost them.
But she lost us.
No, you're here. Okay, well, in the meantime, Mayor Bill de Blasio has now tweeted out, okay, here's what Mayor Bill de Blasio has tweeted out, the garbage mayor of New York. Quote, Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum are victims. They should be alive today. Well, I think there are probably a lot of small children who are not particularly concerned about Joseph Rosenbaum's span of life. The only reason they're not is because a violent, dangerous man chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. To call this a miscarriage of justice is an understatement. That's from Mayor Bill de Blasio 27 minutes ago. So after the verdict. So a number one, I think, on the roster of defendants in a defamation suit might be Bill de Blasio. A violent, dangerous man chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. First of all, it's not even true.
Didn't happen.
Okay, he didn't take the gun across state lines, right? Like there are overt falsehoods in that, and just start shooting. Man.
But
I hope that Kyle Rittenhouse gets filthy rich off Bill de Blasio. Watching a communist get sued into the ground for defamation is going to be spectacular.
The narrative here was always so divorced from reality. It wasn't even just, the people who were shot are good people, not child rapists and criminals who started the attack. And the boy is a white supremacist, even though there's just no evidence of that whatsoever, completely plucked from thin air. But even beyond that, we were told that this was a race case. This white supremacist was going after black people. Now, all the people he shot were white, but it's as though even that most basic fact did not matter to the media narrative.
That's exactly right. And it didn't matter to the media narrative. It never mattered to the media narrative. Like they constructed a fake media narrative in which Kyle Rittenhouse just went and shot a bunch of black people.
Yep.
He shot a convicted multiple-time child molester. He shot a guy who had been convicted for attacking his brother and his own mother. He shot a guy who was a member of Antifa who was approaching him with a gun. Those are the three people he shot. And the prosecutor got up there. I'll never get over this. The prosecutor got up there and literally tried to make the case that the people who were trying to murder Kyle Rittenhouse were the heroes, right? This is clip 13. Guys, you have clip 13? This is this is Binger's case, because it's just, I think we ought to replay it because of just how delusional it is.
We've had several police officers testify that in an active shooter situation, their first instinct, their first training is to go in and stop the threat. They don't sit there and wonder, well, maybe it was self-defense. I don't know. I'm going to, wait and see. And every day we read about heroes that stop active shooters. That's what was going on here. And that crowd was right. And that crowd was full of heroes.
That crowd was full of heroes, That's what the prosecutor was saying. And now you've got Bill de Blasio saying the same thing. Man, my heroes don't come in the form of people who molest kids. I just call me crazy, but if you molest kids, you're not on the heroes list. I think that is a pretty safe assumption. If you attack a kid who's lying, I'll say a young man, because I want to be consistent, a young man who falls backward and is lying prone, and you walk up to him unholstering your gun to murder him, this does not make you a hero in any way, shape, or form. By the way, Gage Grosskreutz, who's treated by the media as some sort of decent witness to all of this, overtly lied to the cops. He lied to the police. He told the police that the gun was out of his holster because it fell out of his holster. He is on tape taking the gun out of its holster and beginning to raise it to shoot Kyle Rittenhouse, and then he gets his arm blown away. Right? That's what happened. And then he went on the stand and accidentally told the truth. And then Good Morning America tried to rehab him. So he went on the stand and he was asked specifically about whether Rittenhouse had shot him before or after he'd raised the gun. This is clip 23. Okay, here's Grosskreutz admitting that he was pointing the gun at Rittenhouse before Rittenhouse shot him.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Correct. Okay, so then what happened? They put him on Good Morning America to try to rehab him, and he said on Good Morning America that he thought that Kyle Rittenhouse was there to murder people. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the media are going to stick with the narrative, because here's what we know more than anything else about these jackasses. What we know more than anything else about them is that they do not care about the truth so long as the truth contradicts their narrative. We know this because half the Democratic Party will still list among the victims of police violence Michael Brown. They'll still do this. They will still do the hands up, don't shoot routine. They will still suggest that Michael Brown, who was shot in Ferguson, Missouri, after attacking a police officer, firing the police officer's gun, and then attempting to charge the police officer, they will still claim that he was a victim of racist police violence.
After multiple autopsies, after the grand jury, after eyewitness testimony, all contradict their narrative. They will still push that. You know,
the Obama DOJ investigated it. It's a hate crime. And the Obama DOJ came up with the exact same answer as the grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri. And they are still maintaining this. Kamala Harris, during the last campaign, tweeted out Michael Brown's name. These are the same pathetic specimens who spent the last year pretending that Jacob Blake was a victim rather than an alleged rapist. Okay, they called his family. The only reason everything that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin is a direct outgrowth of the media inflaming riots. Period. End of story. If the media had not been inflaming riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin, there wouldn't have been any riots. Rittenhouse wouldn't have been there, and none of this would have happened. If anybody begins this causal chain of events, it's not even Jacob Blake, it's the media coverage. Because Jacob Blake was a criminal, and Jacob Blake was at his ex-girlfriend's house who had alleged that he digitally raped her, and she called the cops because he showed up at her house, and then the cops show up. He refuses to acquiesce to arrest. He resists arrest. He has a knife on him. He is shot, and the police and the media declare that this is another case of racist murder, and riots break out in Kenosha. I've said for a long time that I really rely very strongly on the principle that I attribute to stupidity everything that I can, because I don't like attributing things to malice. But when it comes to the coverage of race-based crime issues in this country, the media are malicious. They are malicious liars.
Well,
it is not about stupidity. It is about malice.
We have just a little smattering to give you a flavor of the media coverage before this verdict came out. Listen to how divorced it is from what we now know to be true.
Rittenhouse is basically what you would have had in a school shooter.
He's a 17-year-old kid. He shouldn't have had a gun. He crossed state lines to supposedly protect property. No, he was going out to shoot people.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old vigilante.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the vigilante.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the armed teenage vigilante.
A 17-year-old vigilante, arguably a domestic terrorist, picked up a rifle, drove to a different state to shoot people.
Kyle Rittenhouse, a guy who's deeply racist, went with weapons to a Black Lives Matter protest looking to get in trouble. He did. He murdered a couple of people.
Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old kid, just running around, shooting and killing protesters.
You see the 17-year-old who was radicalized by Trumpism, took his AR-15 to Kenosha and became a killer.
A white, Trump-supporting, MAGA-loving, Blue Lives Matter social media partisan, 17 years old, picks up a gun, drives from one state to another with the intent to shoot people.
A lie told often enough
Just
becomes the truth, right? Or at least as far as the media are concerned.
Absolutely astonishing. By the way, just this April, a police officer was fired. A Virginia police officer was fired for donating to Kyle Rittenhouse's defense fund. Right? That was just in April. Okay, these people are just, they're the worst. The ACLU of Maryland just tweeted out, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they just tweeted out, dangerous, disgusting, unacceptable white supremacy in Rittenhouse verdict. White supremacy? He shot a bunch of white people. The hell are you talking about? You know, by the way, I was unaware that the ACLU stands not for American Civil Liberties Union, but for dangerous race-baiting clowns, because apparently that's what it stands for right now. It's absolutely nuts. The reactions, by the way, are flowing in fast and furious. CNN has now begun to react, and of course the tears are salty and somewhat delicious. We have a tumbler just to hold them, actually. And here we have CNN reaction number one. The law is too favorable to the defendant. So the liberals who spent their lives whining about prosecutors now say the law is too favorable to the defendant.
I agree. I guess we agree, except in this case where it was so clear. You know, you make a good point, Ben, here on white supremacy, which is if the verdict is white supremacist because a white guy got off the hook, well, what is it when 3 white guys got shot and 2 of those white guys died? Wouldn't this be the opposite of that? You know, if you just kind of look at the numbers here, it seems pretty disfavorable to the white people in Antifa and BLM.
Yeah, he's knocking down the white populations. That's really a problem. Kyle Rittenhouse, he's anti-white. That's really the problem right here. How about CNN reaction number 2? Here we have, the trial was too political. We're hearing this from CNN, the arbiter of all objective news and non-political coverage. They say that the trial was just too political, say the people who put on people every single day for 4 years claiming that Donald Trump was a Russian's cat paw, and then they spent a year suggesting that Kyle Rittenhouse was a mass shooting white supremacist. So now CNN is saying that the trial is too political. We'll grab that clip in just a second. It is pretty amazing. Joy Reid, I think, is already reacting, by the way. So I think that she has put out a tweet. Let me grab that just for the bleeps and giggles of it. Let's find what our good friend Joy Reid is saying about all of this, because obviously, you know, I think it's important to know what the crazies in our society
it's important because
about this particular.
If you read a Joy Reid tweet, it's very helpful because you can almost always know that the exact opposite is true. It's actually a good way to orient yourself.
So I have to bring up an incognito
truth.
Window because she blocks me. I don't know if Joy Reid blocks you. But
of course she blocked me, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So here are her tweets about this. She has multiple. So she tweeted out, "We knew, but it's sometimes helpful to remind ourselves how America was designed to work. It continues to work as designed. We have learned again what is considered legal for some people to do in America. It's helpful to know where you stand in your country. Be safe out there." So again, it's white supremacy. That's it. And then she tweeted out, "In the Rittenhouse case, the 13th juror was the judge." Ooh, Joy Reid. So I just want to remind you that in the last week or so, there was a case in Chicago in which gang members were shooting at each other, and the police literally decided not to bring any sort of prosecution because they were just firing at each other, and it's not a big deal. Like this, I'm not kidding. Okay, there was a mid-morning. This is according to ABC7Chicago.com. This is from October, and here is what it says. There's an outcry from the mayor and some Chicago aldermen after men linked by police to a deadly gang shootout in Austin last week were released from custody. Prosecutors declined to charge each of them with a pair of felonies, including first-degree murder. The mid-morning gunfight, which left one shooter dead and 2 of the suspects wounded, stemmed from an internal dispute between the 2 gang factions, according to the Chicago Sun-Times. Apparently, the reason that they did this is they said, quote, mutual combatants was cited as a reason for the rejection. Mutual combat is a legal term used to define a fight or struggle 2 parties willingly engage in. So if you get in like a fist fight because you guys have agreed to get in a fist fight, then that's okay. But typically speaking, if you're in the middle of a public area and you shoot each other and then you kill some bystanders, typically that doesn't count as mutual combat. So I just have a question. Why is it that in our supposedly horrifically racist criminal justice system where Kyle Rittenhouse goes to trial for shooting in self-defense 3 white men, you have black people shooting each other in Chicago and the Cook County Sheriff's Office basically being like, mutual combat. What's the big deal? The reality in this country, by the way, is that if you actually want to save black lives, you prosecute black murderers. And unfortunately, murder in the black community is not prosecuted the way that it ought to be. The average black murderer is more likely not to serve prison time than the average white murderer because there are not enough witnesses who are willing to come forward and talk to the cops, or there aren't enough cops in the neighborhood. So this Joy Reid, man, I don't even know why bother? Why bother reacting to her stupidity?
But Ben, what you're saying is only significant if you want to improve things in these sorts of communities. But I'm not convinced that the left wants to do anything like that. Actually, our friend Candace Owens talks about this quite a lot. I think Candace has finally been patched back into us. Our big tech overlords or whoever else is playing with the connections have not succeeded. So, Candace, I mean, what does this mean? Is Kenosha going to go up in flames tonight?
Probably, and this is exactly what they want, of course. Mob justice is what they want, so if they don't get what they want, they just go crazier. And, I do want to point to this sort of public outcry, and you're absolutely right. Joseph Rosenbaum, the idea that he was there that night because he wanted to defend black lives is the biggest part of, to me, like one of the biggest pieces of jokes in this entire scenario. Like, anybody thinks that this guy, a convicted pedophile, spent 12 years in prison. He also spent time actually in a mental asylum, right? He's got psychological issues, that he really went out that night because he wanted to defend black lives. No, he went out that night because everybody knows that when Black Lives Matter says that they're having a riot or they're going to be protesting, and I put that in parentheses because they're not there to protest. It means that you get to go out and you get to do criminal stuff and not get charged for it, right? This is what it means. It's one night of the purge. Go out, grab Louis Vuitton bags, smash and grab, do whatever you want. No one's going to do anything. In fact, the celebrities are going to get together and say, we got to figure out how we can bail these criminals out because they're fighting for justice. They're not. And I want to say that we have to stop separating between the media and these militant groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, because they're the same, right? The media members sit at home and they're comfortable, legacy media members, but these other groups, they are their boots on the ground. So the reason why the media has stood behind Black Lives Matter and they stood behind Antifa is because they realize they come up with a narrative and they need that narrative to be defended at all costs, right? So they give them a pass and they say, this is our narrative. Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist. Kyle Rittenhouse is a domestic terrorist. They know this not to be true, right? But they want Black Lives Matter to defend that narrative and to go out and to make sure and to ensure that the outcome is that eventually it is true. And so there's so much going on here. And this is why I believe that there was also a public outcry, which not enough people are talking about. Remember, the media was suddenly saying, oh, there's too many white jurors. Like this suddenly became like, oh my gosh, have you realized how many white jurors there are in this case that is involving 3 white men? Like that suddenly in a majority white country, like suddenly this was a very big piece of the story, as if this is news. It would be weird if it was an all white jury in Nigeria. Not really that big of a deal that it's a majority white jury in America, but they made it a big deal because I think that at the end of the day, what they wanted more black people on the jury. They wanted a majority black jury because in the media's eyes, they believe that black Americans are emotional and they are irrational and that they will vote according to how they're feeling and not according to the facts. I honestly believe that. And we've seen that in some cases that is true. I mean, look at LeBron James. What piece of this case made LeBron James want to come out and attack Kyle Rittenhouse? As he's watching the case and he's watching the same evidence that we're all watching, why did LeBron James feel the need to come out and make fun of Kyle Rittenhouse crying? Because he's not acting rationally and he's acting irrationally and emotionally. So that's something that really disturbed me about this case that I feel like a lot of people weren't talking enough about, was why the media wanted there to be more black people on the jury. And at the end of the day, I think that there is sort of this racist undertone in the reason why they wanted more black jurists.
We lost Ben.
Can you guys hear me?
We do have you, Candace, but we lost Ben. There we are. Now we got you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. All I was going to say is that I'm excited that the presidency of Kamala Harris, which lasted for Joe Biden's colonoscopy, right? She was acting president during his colonoscopy. The presidency of Kamala Harris, I have to say it was great. I mean, during that period, Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted. America began to heal. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the greatest presidencies I've ever experienced. It was great.
It exceeded my expectations, I have to tell you. I had low expectations for Kamala as the first woman president, but it turned out well, and it lasted exactly as long as I wanted it to, by the way. Now, we shouldn't let Kamala Harris or Joe Biden off the hook here. They have been actively encouraging all of the BLM riots, one of which led to this trial today in Kenosha. Kamala Harris was bailing some of the rioters out of prison in the George Floyd riots. Staffers for Joe Biden were doing the same thing. The elected Democrats have been doing this for years. Is there ever any moment where they say, hey, sorry, whoops, we got it wrong, oh, my bad? No. Presumably, they just double down. But what happens at the next BLM riot, which for all we know could be in a matter of hours?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is. Honestly, I think it's unlikely there are going to be riots tonight. I just don't think there's enough taste for the riots. First of all, it's real cold in Wisconsin right now. It's one thing to riot in the middle of the summer in Wisconsin when it's a little bit nice out. It's another thing. Like one thing that you'll notice about rioters is that they tend to be a little bit lazy. I know because I've been the subject of a couple of them. And when the weather is bad, they just don't show up. Like when I was at University of Connecticut, and there's a lot of talk about people going crazy. It was like 0 degrees outside. And I'm like, nah, I think I'll stay home and smoke weed. And so I have a feeling that there might be a lot of that today. Also, no matter how hard the media tried to make this into a major national race case, it just wasn't. It just wasn't. And I think that a lot of the people who are Black Lives Matter motivated don't look at the Rittenhouse case and feel anything like the same passion for it that they felt for, say, the Derek Chauvin case, where if Chauvin had been acquitted, there's no doubt there would have been riots. So I'd be skeptical that there are going to be riots tonight.
Well, I will say that I think because this case went on for a few days, actually the truth kind of got out of bed. Like the lie made its way around the world. When this case first started, you were sensing this ferociousness online, and people were definitely like, he better be, because they were under the delusion that he had killed 2 black people. I'm not even kidding. I mean, the amount of times that I issued a tweet defending Kyle Rittenhouse, and I had black people writing back to me saying that, of course you would pick his side, you're a race traitor. And I actually wrote back to them going, they actually thought that 2 black people were killed. I mean, that is how big and how wide this media delusion was. And they were shocked to discover that no, in fact, we're talking about 2 white people that were killed and 2 white people that have records, right? A convicted pedophile, a convicted domestic abuser, another, the second guy who was arrested for false imprisonment of another individual. So I think that because we had time on our side, the truth did kind of get out, and people are going, okay, maybe this is a weird one for us to be standing behind and pretending that this has anything to do with Black lives.
We actually, at the Daily Wire, we have some video footage of a protester from outside of the Kenosha courthouse making the same argument that the people were making in your Twitter responses. We sent our reporter Georgia Howe out. She spoke to Jacob Blake's uncle. So Jacob Blake's uncle was one of the protesters outside the courthouse. He said this is all about race. And when Georgia pointed out that the people who were shot were white, he even made that about race.
Now, a lot of people have been making this about race, and I notice we have some Black Lives Matter protesters here. Do you think this case is about race?
Of course. I'm going to be just cold-blooded honest with you. Of course it is. A young black man was shot 7 times in the back, who was never charged with any crime, who was not being aggressive, and who had his back turned on a police officer.
Now, but when it comes to the Kyle Rittenhouse case, all of the men that he shot were white. So how is the Kyle Rittenhouse case about race?
So to be blunt with you, back in the 50s, 40s, and 60s, they would refer to them as lovers. So they were sacrificed. They were sacrificed, and this young man was used. So if they can, the tone that we're setting today is that I don't believe our Caucasian counterparts are willing to give up the lives of their young people on the street. This is no different than the shooting in Colorado, the shooting in Florida. It was a young person, because he would have been in high school or just out of high school, and he shouldn't have had a gun. And he murdered people with the gun that he had illegally.
Some people would say, Jacob Blake was visited in the hospital by the Vice President of the United States. They would say that is a form of privilege, sort of like what you're discussing.
Let me tell you, I wish you would mention the president in my presence. He has.
So could anybody translate that word salad into English for me? Because that guy clearly did not realize that no black people were shot in this. And so then he says, well, no, but look, in the 40s and the 60s and the 50s, and the chronology's all over, and they probably would have used the N-word a lot. And anyway, and it's about the gun, and what is he even arguing?
There is no argument there, and this is what we're facing in America right now is we have this crisis of ignorance. People are incredibly ignorant. They're motivated by emotions and very little fact, and it's why I always point to the fact that, you know, between the media and these boots on the ground organizations like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, this really is a master-slave relationship, right? And I go back to, in consideration of our American history, why it was that masters never wanted slaves to be allowed to learn how to read. And the reason is because they wanted them to be ignorant. And when I look at these cases and you talk to these people that are on the ground, that are so angry, so ready to riot, so convinced that they are fighting for justice, and they're absent any facts. I think of that. I think of the fact that they have absolutely no knowledge on their side, so they're very easily manipulated, and it's sad. You know, it's funny. It's equal parts funny, but it's also very sad.
Ben, is this just going to continue to be a race case?
Georgia mentions right there. Georgia mentions right there. You know, the fact that Joe Biden talked to Jacob Blake's family, and Kamala Harris went and visited with Jacob Blake, and all of this. The Democratic Party's role in this is really despicable, really, really despicable. It was just last September that Joe Biden and his campaign ran an ad linking Kyle Rittenhouse to the racists in Charlottesville. I mean, he literally ran an ad in which he said he was quoting Chris Wallace, and Chris Wallace was talking to Trump about white supremacy and all this. And they flashed a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse. They flashed a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse on the screen. The Democratic National Committee decided that Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist who had shot people because he was a white supremacist, and that became the media narrative. Honestly, the last 5 years, if your faith in institutions hasn't been fatally fractured over the last 5 years, I honestly don't know what you're watching. And that's why I think that, you know, to go back to Candace's earlier point, Candace, when your screen froze up, I was seconding your sort of pessimism about the system. I was saying that it feels like we're one hair's breadth away from the system being completely shattered, meaning that we're a little surprised. I mean, I'll tell you, I felt a little bit of surprise and a little bit of relief that the jury did the right thing, because after all of that time, I started to think, okay, for sure this is coming back hung jury. Yeah. And for sure somebody got convinced in there that it would be a bad move for the country for them to acquit, or maybe there was one person in there whose political agenda was more important than the case, and they just wouldn't let it go, and they're like a terrier. And so when it came back and it was the right verdict, I was relieved. But I was a little bit surprised. And the fact that you feel surprised now when the correct verdict comes down says something about where we are with the institutions in the country. And that's really disturbing.
I suppose that it is a question of glass half empty.
Bittersweet.
Well, there's a little glass half empty, glass half full here, which is I share your great, dissatisfaction with the way the institutions work. But for a long time, Republicans said that we're not going to win elections again. The Democrats are going to rig everything. We're not going to win. And then you win this one race in Virginia, and all of a sudden you think, okay, maybe there's a fighting chance. The same way with this verdict, you think the criminal justice system is so horribly perverted and corrupted, and it is rigged against ordinary patriotic Americans. It is rigged against our Second Amendment. It is rigged against all these things. But then you get the right result here. Can we look at this as a glass half full and say maybe the seeds are here to rebuild the country, or is it your opinion that it always gets darkest before it goes totally pitch black? Candace?
You know, my personal opinion is that in this case, we were in many ways lucky that Kyle Rittenhouse was so young, and I'm sure that his age weighed very heavily on the jurists' minds. I don't know that we would have had this same result had Kyle Rittenhouse been a 35-year-old man. And I think that his youth worked for him. You know, people really understood this is really a young, innocent kid who was out there trying to do the right thing. And I can't imagine any jury being able to sleep at night if you locked up a 17, 18-year-old kid knowing that all the facts were on his side. I don't feel too optimistic about our criminal justice system just because of how complicit our media has been in this narrative. And you were so correct, Ben. I think I got cut off earlier when you were talking about how closely linked this was to last year's election. I mean, they were bloodthirsty for a race narrative. It didn't matter. If you were a white man breathing in America and you did anything, and they could spin it into race, even if you killed 2 white people, right? They were going to go for it, and they were going to go for it unapologetically, and they weren't going to stop. And I don't sense that's stopping in America. Now, is it a winning strategy for Democrats going forward? No, I don't think that strategy is winning anymore. I think that especially now that they've extended this white supremacist narrative to include parents, as we saw in Virginia, to your point, that was a dangerous turning point for them because parents vote. But in terms of the media, no, I don't think they're going to be changing strategies anytime soon.
Well, it does raise the question. I mean, if the race narrative here did kind of flop. It seems to me that race relations have only gotten worse in this country for the past 10, 15 years. I feel that race relations in the 90s, even with the O.J. Simpson trial and Rodney King, then they seemed better than they do right now. So what is the end of that? I mean, is the end that it keeps just getting worse and worse and worse until we're all, fighting with one another? Or is there any way to kind of turn it around?
I think things are turning around. I think that the wokes are beginning to annoy everybody. And I think that sooner or later, Democrats are going to have to realize that they are locked in a death embrace with the intersectional coalition. And if the idea is that they think that they are going to win elections from here till the end of time by embracing the victimology narrative, I don't think that's right. I mean, they got their asses kicked in Virginia. They got their asses kicked in New Jersey. I think they're about to get their asses handed to them in the 2022 elections. They're down 8 to 10 points in the generic congressional ballot. You hit 2024, and their candidate base right now is an adult old man who can't string together two sentences and is most sentient when he is anesthetized for a colonoscopy. A vice president who is so unpopular, she makes Hillary Clinton look like the most popular person on planet Earth and the most charming. And Pete Buttigieg, a man who went missing on the job for 2 full months and no one even noticed. And then he came back to brag about how he'd taken paternity leave to care for his husband who was not in any way physically traumatized by a birth. So, I don't think that that's a deep bench for the Democrats right now. I think that they're in a world of hurt. I think that they've told themselves a utopian myth about forging a new coalition that was never going to be beaten again. And I think they've been telling themselves this myth since 2012. I think Trump shocked the crap out of them, and that is why they have been utterly insane since 2016. They thought they were never losing an election again after 2012. And then 2016 came, and Trump won, and it blew their minds, and they've never been able to recover. And then 2020 came, and instead of them saying, okay, well, maybe this was a referendum for us to try and restore some sense of normalcy or unity, instead they went, oh, well, let's go right back to the 2012 presumption that if we embrace the Barack Obama racially polarizing intersectional coalition strategy, we'll win from here on out. And instead, inside of a year, they've completely destroyed their own possibility of winning. I've never seen anything like it. It is absolutely incredible to watch as a guy who won 80 million votes because he's a dead person, decided that he would reanimate and then be Bernie Sanders. Like, why? Why? But they're doing it, which means that eventually they'll wise up or they'll get their asses kicked. From here till the rest of the time. No one likes this. No one likes this. Black Americans don't like it, by the way. The notion that Black Americans are begging for defund the police, that Black Americans are just begging for this kind of equity talk garbage that is being ladled on them by the media, that Black Americans want to be patronized and catered to this way. I don't think that that's true. One other point here. I think that we need to keep in mind that the reason that this trial may have gone the way that it did is because it happened in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. If this trial happens, and this is happening in Madison, Wisconsin, I don't know that this goes exactly the same way. Because if this is political, Kenosha County went 51% for Donald Trump and 48% for Joe Biden. That means they had some people who are on the jury who are not ensconced in this narrative. If this happens in Los Angeles, or if this happens in New York, or if this happens in a deep blue area, not an evenly divided area, a deep blue area, I don't know that Kyle Rittenhouse gets acquitted, right? Then I think you might be looking at the Derek Chauvin trial, frankly.
Well, to Candace's point, we're allowed. I guess we're allowed now, Ben, because you're Jewish, we're allowed to utter the name of George Soros without being called neo-Nazi white supremacists. But George Soros,
You'll still get called a white supremacist.
Well, still, yeah, I'm a swarthy supremacist myself. George Soros, we know, is running these DA candidates, running prosecutors who have a very serious left-wing political agenda, and it works. And he's done a good job. And I don't even want to really knock George Soros for it. George Soros is a very effective political tactician. My question is, why don't conservatives do this? Why don't we run prosecutors? Why don't we run DAs? I mean, what kind of infrastructure do we need to build to be able to fight back?
Well, I think that's the next thing.
That's a great question.
I do think that's the next thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think that there has been a lot of talk about how people are feeling let down by the GOP and let down by the RNC, and feeling that even in the times that we do have power, that we don't do enough. And so I sense that frustration around Republican voters. Obviously, I travel the country, I speak on the ground. They're like, what more can we do when we feel that when we actually get power, not much is done? I mean, we've been talking about these issues for years, especially in terms of big tech, right? I mean, big tech is effectively trying to decide on elections when you're talking about censoring things like the Hunter Biden laptop, when you're talking about allowing a lie to live, like Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist domestic terrorist, to contribute to an election time narrative. We're not in a good way in this country. And so I think these are larger questions that are going to need immediate answering. But I will say this, that I've been talking a lot on my show about children and about how this was the critical error that the left made. right? I think they had people and they had their voters and everything was good and fine, and they were getting crazier and crazier, and people kind of held on for this magic carpet ride. But when they started attacking children and people started really being able to see what they were teaching children, and when you started telling children on the basis of their skin color that they were either oppressed or privileged, as if anyone's going to actually believe that Malia Obama is oppressed because of the color of her skin, or Sasha Obama is oppressed because of the color of her skin, and circumstances where you have white people that are extremely poor that are being told that they're privileged because of their skin, it wasn't going to bode well. And I think one of the good things about the Biden presidency, and I've said this over again, I really try to see the silver lining, and I think that the good thing is that people are seeing that we weren't just these crazy Republicans that were just saying things, right? When we said we need to solve this border issue, whether you believed in build the wall. Well, I think that when Trump ran on that, people said it's because he's a horrible racist. Now they're actually seeing that over 2 million people over the last year have made their way over the border. There is something happening on the border that does need to be addressed. We sounded like crazy Republicans and crazy conservatives when we said they're coming for your kids. Now you're seeing these parents trying to, speak at school board meetings that are being classified as domestic terrorists. So I think that what the Joe Biden presidency has allowed for is more transparency. And I think that you're seeing people come together, even though it doesn't feel like it when you're watching the mainstream media. I think that the moderates are coming together now and realizing that we have to do things to change around the country, and the left has gone way too far left, and no sane person wants children taught pornography. No sane person wants their child classified because of the color of their skin.
That's right. That's a hopeful note to end on.
I'm keeping an eye here on Crazy Town Patrol. I'm keeping an eye here on Crazy Town Patrol. So we have Representative Adron Espaillat, who has tweeted out, Kyle Rittenhouse is living proof that white tears can still forestall justice. A murderer is once again walking free today. Our system is terribly broken. We also have genderless Ken doll Gavin Newsom saying, America today, you can break the law, carry around weapons built for a military, shoot and kill people and get away with it. That's the message we've just sent to armed vigilantes across the nation. This is the message from the Democratic Party. Remember it next time you go to the polls. Remember that it was Joe Biden who cut the ad you're about to see featuring Kyle Rittenhouse as a white supremacist.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared to specifically
do it?
Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. You want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Okay, so remember, they lumped in Kyle Rittenhouse with all of this, and then they lied about what Trump said, right? Because that ain't what Trump meant by that was to condemn the Proud Boys. They lied about all of this because it was not part of their narrative. They required their narrative, and Kyle Rittenhouse didn't pay the price this time, and they are pissed. They are pissed that their quarry escaped them because he was going to be the case in point of how they can target anyone and destroy anyone so long as you fall into their narrative trap.
We've only got a couple minutes left, but, obviously the verdict is the verdict. He's not guilty. We've talked a lot about what that means for the broader political landscape. Just before we go, some concluding thoughts. What does it mean for Kyle Rittenhouse? What does it mean for the right to self-defense? The Second Amendment lives to see another day. We're not quite living in some Kafka hellscape yet. Ben, you had said, this is what's coming next. Well, I guess before we go, what's coming next?
I mean, the next thing that's going to happen is that the Democratic Party had better get wise, or they're about to lose every election for the rest of time, or at least get absolutely wiped out next year. I think Republicans are starting to see more and more that they have to focus locally. The other day on my show, I put out a call to parents all over the country to send me any tips on CRT or radical gender theory being taught in schools. I've been absolutely overwhelmed. I mean, I'm talking thousands of messages. People are awake. People are realizing what is happening right now. And I think that you're going to start to see resources poured into prosecutorial races around the country to fight the fight the Democrats have been fighting for a long time. Republicans tend to do politics as a form of entertainment. Democrats do politics as a form of business because they see government as the big cash cow and the big gun that they can use to compel their belief system. Republicans are beginning to realize what a threat that is. And I think the fight is back, and I think the fight has already begun.
A good note to end on, everybody. Ben, Candace, thank you for joining, and a wonderful verdict and something we can really cheers, I think, our leftist tears tumblers to. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. If you want to join the fight here at the Daily Wire, we do our best, of course, to go out and help lead that cultural and political fight today. So you can head on over to dailywire.com. Head on over, please subscribe. Thank you for being with us, and a toast to justice being done, at least today. Cheers.